Hey everyone, it's Carol and welcome to episode 35 of Spieckerman Speaks Retail, where we navigate retail from now to next in every episode. I'm here to help all kinds of retail-focused companies land big B2B programs and cut through the noise through my latest retail trajectories. These are themes that I'm constantly creating, connecting, and mapping across all kinds of categories, borders, business models, and touch points. They help make sense of all the seemingly random stuff happening in retail so you can do something about it. Today, I'm revisiting a trajectory that we touched on early last year, but recently it started to accelerate and evolve in all kinds of interesting new ways. I'm talking about the curtailing of wholesaling, how brands and some retailers were starting to reduce or eliminate their wholesale relationships. Well, a lot's happened since we first talked about this, and there have been some unexpected ripples from the wholesale retreat of one power brand in particular. But the great news is all of it contradicts this brands are dead drumbeat that's been getting louder in the retail media. In fact, once we're done, I think you'll agree that the opposite is actually at work. But those of us who've been in the retail business for a while used to talk about wholesale all the time, mainly because brands and manufacturers selling their stuff through retailers used to be the dominant model driving retail. In fact, at one time, it was pretty much the only way that brands could get their products out in the market at scale. Basically, if you didn't have wholesale, you didn't have a business. And wholesale was one of the ways that retailers even had products to sell. The other was private brands, but back in the day, retailers mostly relied on others to make those brands. That was before they built up these big internal sourcing and brand development teams that are now just pretty much the standard for any major retailer. But now there are all kinds of other models competing for attention. We talk a lot about direct-to-consumer, but you've got wholesale brands selling through their own online platforms and tapping into social commerce, digitally native brands now stretching their direct-to-consumer tentacles outside of digital by hanging a shingle. I started and built my career in the wholesale business. I sold apparel, fashion, accessories, kids products, and all kinds of other categories to retailers to the tune of millions of dollars. And later, I managed and coached others so that they could do the same. But back when wholesale was the only game in town, it was out of the question for brands to open their own stores or even to try to sell to competing retailers. Anyone who stepped out of line risked getting shunned by their retail partners and booted right out of the store. So at the end of the day, distribution was a lot more limited, but that was cool because there were so many retailers to go around that even if you limited your distribution just to one tier of retail, you could do a really nice business. But then a few brands started stepping out. Initially, most of them were in the beauty space, but they dared to open their own stores. And some of those stores sat right across the mall from their biggest department store wholesale accounts. But here's the thing. To everyone's surprise, the world didn't come to an end. There really wasn't a lot of backlash. So brands started getting bolder and bolder into all kinds of other categories. So distribution started to blow open and attitudes changed right along with it. Brands stopped explaining themselves and apologizing, and even retailers started to see how having more brands in more places could be good for everyone. I call this the beginning of the brand ubiquity era, or my official trajectory is that brand ubiquity is the new exclusivity. And now that's been true for quite some time, and it really hasn't abated since all of that happened. This really was the beginning of the Wild West, and the upshot is that everyone was suddenly a lot more free to roam, and that freedom laid a foundation for the future. Because you fast forward to the digital age, and the options have only exploded. Brands aren't just selling to multiple retailers. They're opening branded stores, they're building out e-commerce capabilities, and they're selling on others' online marketplaces. And some of those marketplaces and platforms like Amazon have further eroded those old school brand purity standards because now it's pretty much come one, come all, and it's all good. We want your brands. But Nike's initial pullback from wholesale has continued to be the billboard for this more recent curtailing of wholesale. Nike announced that it'd be pulling out of several retailers a while back. Now, most of those retailers were middle market regional players like Belk and Dillard's initially. But then Nike drew a major line in the sand when it shut off direct distribution to Amazon. And since that time, Nike's gone on to cut the cord with even more retailers. The media spotlight mostly has been trained on how all of this validates Nike's brand power and this momentum for the overall direct-to-consumer movement. But it didn't happen overnight. Nike's been diligently going about building out its platform for a while. Nike is a multi-format retailer that runs a connected digital engagement and data gathering brand empire. All of it powers its direct-to-consumer sales. And the more that Nike builds up its platform, the more those wholesale relationships seem like a distraction, or maybe even a liability that compromises the Nike brand, its ability to control prices, and at the end of the day, maybe even profitability. So Nike still serves as the uber example of how brands can wrest back control, and that's the brand power storyline that always drives the headlines. But invariably, some version of the cautionary phrase, "But remember, not everyone is a Nike," follows, as if to ward off any attempts by lesser brands to get all uppity. But what's interesting is that a flood of brands haven't attempted to follow in Nike's footsteps. In fact, it's going in the opposite direction. So maybe no warnings were needed after all, because brands are sticking with wholesale, and some are even doubling down on it, as we'll talk about in just a minute. That's not to say that brands aren't making direct-to-consumer pushes. They are. Under Armour initiated its own wholesale pullback in 2020, and you've got brands like Adidas that are all about growing their D2C footprint too. But so far, all of this has been more of a distribution rebalancing act than anything, because both companies have set goals of having direct-to-consumer represent about 50% of sales. Now, that's a nice round number that in no way excludes wholesale. In fact, it's a deliberate and simultaneous strategy to grow both channels, wholesale and direct-to-consumer, at the same time. So we're still very much in this brand ubiquity era, and very few brands will completely do away with wholesale. It's going to be more of a hybrid situation. Or, as I always say, the transitions between now and next always go on much longer than you'd think. But when it comes to the curtailing of wholesale, it's still Nike and everyone else. And it turns out that Nike's departure from wholesale not only took some retailers by surprise, the prospect of losing this one power brand was so painful that lots of retailers sprang into action to head off any aftershocks the minute they found out. And competing athletic brands have been more than happy to run to the rescue. Look at Foot Locker. Nike represented a whopping 75% of Foot Locker's sales in 2020. Foot Locker stores were basically flagship locations for Nike. So losing Nike could have definitely put Foot Locker in the hurt locker. But Adidas threw on its superhero cape and just announced a long-term partnership with Foot Locker across women's, kids, and apparel. So the question becomes, can a bigger presence by a smaller brand make up the difference, or at least make a dent in the loss? Intellectual property purveyors like Authentic Brands Group are also getting in on the action. Authentic Brands bought Reebok in March and just blasted out of the gate by inking a deal with Macy's, which is another retailer that was spurned by Nike. And ABG will also offer some exclusive styles to Foot Locker. The curtailing of wholesaling has taken on a whole new meaning as retailers attempt to cap brands in the wake of Nike's rug-pulling play. Kind of like that Saturday Night Live skit from a few years ago, ruining it for everyone. Nike kind of did that because retailers got burned. And as God is their witness, they'll never let another brand be that important to them again. Foot Locker recently stated that it won't let one vendor make up more than 55% of its product spend. 55% isn't exactly a harsh limit, but it does back up that not everyone is a Nike mythology. Can any one non-Nike vendor hit that level? We'll soon find out. Private brands are another arrow in retailers' quivers in the wake of a big brand departure. I've dedicated entire episodes and industry presentations talking about this private brand palooza that's accelerating in retail. And this is particularly true as inflation exerts price pressure. Foot Locker's unveiling new owned brands, and another one of Nike's exes, DSW, is doing the same. Speaking of DSW, they got some buzz earlier this month by launching a new format called Warehouse Reimagined that focuses on showcasing national brands like Adidas, Brooks, Crocs, and Birkenstock in shop-in-shop displays. And you might know that Birkenstock, not coincidentally, had a highly publicized breakup with Amazon a while back. Before it showed the hand to DSW, Nike only represented about 5% of total sales. But when you think about the breadth of assortment that DSW offers across all kinds of footwear and accessory categories, that's really nothing to sneeze at. So Nike's pullout probably wasn't the reason for DSW reimagining the W, but I have to believe it was part of the calculus. In fact, it's not a mystery. DSW CEO clearly stated recently the big why behind its shift to brand shops. Nearly 90% of DSW shoppers visit its website before visiting a store. That makes sense because we all know that clicks drive bricks these days. But the zinger is what's leading shoppers to the website in the first place: brand searches. DSW's data revealed that shoppers are landing on the DSW website after searching for their favorite brands. Brands are driving search, and search is driving brick-and-mortar visits and shopper expectations. So, you want a brand? There it is in its own mini-universe inside a DSW, no longer shuffled into endless aisles filled with cardboard boxes. Or at least in this one beta store in Houston where they're testing out the warehouse reimagined concept. You have to give DSW credit for owning the data and acting on it. They could have easily overruled or ignored this major insight and demanded that national brands be subjugated to DSW's banner. But instead, they took the bull by the horns and changed things up. That should also help DSW become more meaningful to its brand partners, which might engender some loyalty that maybe, just maybe, prevents another big brand from getting the wandering eye. For now, DSW's Warehouse Reimagined is just a lab store in Houston, so it's going to be interesting to see how they deconstruct what's working and then where they send it next. That's a cascade of brand deals, private brand launches, strategy, and format changes that were driven or at least heavily influenced by one big brand curtailing wholesale. It's led to lots of other brands rushing back in. This new wholesale heyday is taking hold with digital darlings like Allbirds. They just announced their first wholesale partnerships with German online footwear player Zalando and Public Lands, which is a brick-and-mortar offspring of Dick's Sporting Goods. After years of relying on owned retail, Skechers is bullish on beefing up its wholesale partnerships, and wholesale was where the brand is seeing the biggest increases. For the first quarter of this year, overall wholesale sales for Skechers were up 33%, and that's against 16% for direct-to-consumer. It was up an even more impressive 40% in the US and EMEA. So those are some really nice numbers for a mature 30-year-old brand. But wait, there's more. Steve Madden reported that wholesale revenues increased 54.1% year over year. Puma's wholesale business grew by 23.3% compared to 2021. Wholesale revenue now makes up almost 80% of Puma's total sales. So that's a whole lot of wholesale mojo in a very short period of time. The wake that Nike created has turned into a tidal wave. Brands like Nike might be going direct to consumer because they can, but many more brands and retailers are leaning into wholesale because they should. So let's track some takeaways. First of all, brands rushing in to fill a void left by other brands, that's nothing new in retail. But these days, the payoffs for doing it can be exponential. So when your brand comes in to save the day, it really pays to get some mileage out of it. Maybe that means inking a longer-term deal with a retailer or bringing more categories to the table like Adidas did with Foot Locker. But either way, it should be your go big or go home moment when retailers are the hungriest for your brands. And I say that with a caveat that true scale is no longer achieved in a single channel. That means three things. First of all, there's no need to get locked up in broad exclusives with a single retailer. Secondly, most brands will scale through a mix of wholesale, owned retail, direct-to-consumer, marketplace placement, and so on. And third, it's all about creating phased plans for your brands. Just look at Skechers, waiting nearly 30 years to pull that wholesale trigger. And selective product exclusives can play a role here too. That is, offering a few styles or a subcategory as an exclusive to a retailer or granting a limited time exclusive prior to scaling up with others. This applies to solutions and services too, and I'm seeing a lot more of this in the market. Wholesale's a great vehicle for amping up secondary categories. Victoria's Secret, another iconic brand, just launched its first wholesale play, and this time it's a beauty push with Amazon. And it makes a lot of sense because Victoria's Secret split off from Bath & Body Works last August, so this could be a great way to get some beauty momentum going for a company that's better known for lingerie. But shaving off a non-core category and plugging it into a scalable platform makes all kinds of sense. I think we've already thoroughly debunked the brands are dead myth, but in the digital age, brands drive search, and search drives foot traffic. Just ask DSW or the other retailers, developers, and intellectual property companies that are on acquisition tears right now. Because they're not just buying a label, they're getting noticed online and bringing shoppers into stores through these brand acquisitions. So, what do you do when a major brand curtails wholesale and leaves you hanging? You innovate your way out of it. It's true, not everyone is a Nike, and that might be a very good thing. Thanks for listening in today. I've got some great interview episodes coming up. In fact, my next one breaks on June 7th, and I'll be chatting with an expert in one of the fastest growing retail categories out there. And it happens to be one that's near and dear to my heart, so I hope you'll stay tuned for that. I've also launched another Retail Insights collaboration with MarketScale, and this time it's a quick take video series on my favorite directional and disruptive retail topics and what they mean to your strategy. Follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter at Retail Expert, that's XPERT, to stay on top of what's next, or hit my site at Spieckermanretail.com to check out more insights and get the latest on my speaking events and other happenings. And if you like what you're hearing, please do like, share, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. If you want to learn more about my platform positioning workshops, trainings, and presentations, or if you're building out content for upcoming thought leadership events, ping me directly at carol@Spieckermanretail.com. Thanks for listening in today. I'll see you next time, and happy selling.